A professional baseball pitcher, right? Like winding up to throw a 95-mile-per-hour fastball.
Oh, yeah. The sheer explosive violence of that movement is just incredible.
It really is. But what's crazy is that the most dangerous part of that pitch isn't the windup. And it's not even the release of the ball.
Right. It's what happens after.
Exactly. The exact moment that ball leaves his hand, his arm is essentially a runaway train. Like, it has generated an unbelievable amount of momentum.
A terrifying amount, honestly.
Yeah. And if the muscles on the back of his shoulder don't instantly act as, like, high-performance, heavy-duty brake pads in that exact fraction of a second, the momentum will literally tear his shoulder joint apart from the inside out.
Yeah, I mean, the joint would just dislocate, the connective tissues would rupture under the sheer force of their own generated power.
Wow.
Decelerating a limb is arguably, more physically demanding and dangerous than accelerating it.
Welcome to the deep dive. That image of the runaway train arm is basically what we are tackling today.
Yeah.
We're looking at this phenomenally detailed, super dense textbook chapter on client-centered exercise prescription, specifically focusing on chapter 5.
It is a dense one.
Very dense. And our mission today is to completely demystify what actually goes into creating a safe, effective, and highly personalized physical workout. Because whether you are someone who, practically lives in the gym, or someone recovering from a nagging injury, or maybe just a weekend warrior who goes hard on Saturdays, this deep dive is going to fundamentally rewire how you view your body in motion.
I really think it will, because we tend to look at exercise through a very primitive lens.
Hand give, tippy rock.
Exactly. You see a heavy dumbbell, you pick it up, you put it down, you sit at a machine and push levers until your muscles burn. But stepping into the actual clinical world of musculoskeletal design, it reveals a landscape of biomechanics that is astonishingly complex. It is not a guessing game. It is a highly analytical, deeply scientific process that, has to happen before a single weight is ever lifted.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that means we can't just talk about working out in broad strokes anymore. We have to figure out how to tear a physical movement apart into its smallest, microscopic pieces. How do we even deconstruct something as fluid as a golf swing or a simple bicep curl?
Well, you cannot prescribe what you do not fundamentally understand. The textbook argues that every single exercise, no matter how simple or complex, has discernible phases.
Okay, phases.
Yeah. If you are doing basic calisthenics or lifting free weights, those phases are usually dictated by gravity. You have an upward phase where you are fighting gravity and a downward phase where you are resisting it.
I mean, that part feels pretty intuitive. Up is hard, down is slightly less hard. But you mentioned the baseball pitcher earlier, and the text uses a batter swinging a bat. Complex sports skills don't just have simple up and down phases, do they?
No, not at all. They are multidimensional. For a complex skill like a baseball swing, the biomechanical analysis breaks it down into 3 distinct phases. First is the preparatory phase.
The wind-up, taking the bat back.
Right, but exactly what happens in the wind-up is critical. You are intentionally moving your body in the complete opposite direction of your intended action.
Oh, interesting.
The purpose isn't just to get into position, You are pre-stretching the muscles. Biomechanically, when you pre-stretch a muscle fiber, you store elastic energy within the tissue, which dramatically increases the force it can apply when it snaps back.
Oh, like pulling back the string on a bow before you loose the arrow. You're loading up the tension.
Exactly. Then comes the power phase. This is the moment of greatest force generation, the explosive contraction that ends with the bat making contact with the ball.
Right.
And most people, even casual observers, tend to focus all their attention here because it's the loudest, most visible part of the action.
I mean, guilty as charged. If I'm trying to get stronger, my instinct is to only focus on that power phase. I want to hit the ball harder. But we're forgetting the runaway train.
We are. The follow-through phase, the instant after contact. The bat is still moving at immense speed. Your torso is rotating violently. Your arms are swinging.
It's chaos.
It is. And your body has to aggressively decelerate all of that mass. By watching the follow-through, a trained professional can trace the exact direction of the force application and, more importantly, identify where the highest risk of injury lies.
Because of the braking.
Yes, the deceleration phase is where the structural integrity of your joints is truly tested.
Okay, before we go any further into how the muscles act as brakes or engines, we need to establish a shared language. The text spends a surprising amount of time just defining the vocabulary of joint movement,
It's vital. Yeah.
and it all anchors back to something called the anatomical position.
Right. The anatomical position is the universal starting line for all biomechanical mapping. So picture someone standing completely erect, facing forward. Their arms are down straight at their sides, but crucially, their palms are facing forward and their toes are pointing straight ahead.
Palms forward. Got it.
Yes. From this exact rigid baseline, every single deviation or movement has a specific, scientifically agreed upon name.
Let's do a quick physical workshop here, because I want everyone listening to actually feel these mechanics.
Definitely.
If you're listening at your desk or standing in your kitchen, let's try some of these. First is flexion and extension.
The basics.
Yeah. The easy way I think of flexion is that you are bending a joint to reduce the angle. Extension is straightening it out to increase the angle. So bend your elbow, bringing your hand to your shoulder, that's flexion. Straighten your arm back at extension. Simple enough?
Simple until you reach the shoulder joint. The text explicitly highlights the shoulder because it routinely trips people up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you are standing in that anatomical position, arms at your sides, and you raise your arm straight out in front of you like you are reaching to shake someone's hand, that action is shoulder flexion.
Wait, raising my arm up in front of me is flexion, but I'm not bending my arm. My elbow is perfectly straight.
Your elbow is straight, yes, but look at the angle of the shoulder joint itself relative to your torso. In the anatomical position, your arm is hanging perfectly parallel to your body.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Right. When you raise it forward, you are changing the angle of the humerus bone relative to your shoulder socket and torso. You are bringing the limb out of that strict baseline. Bringing the arm back down to your side is extension.
That feels completely counterintuitive, but if I focus purely on the joint hinge itself, I can see how the angle is changing relative to the vertical line of my body. Okay, moving on to abduction and adduction. The trick I use for this is the word abduct, which means to take away.
That's a good trick.
So if you move a limb away from the midline of your body, like lifting your arms out to the sides to make a T shape, that is abduction. You're taking the arm away. Adduction is adding it back, pulling it down toward the center of your body.
Exactly. We also have rotational movements to consider. Medial or internal rotation is turning a limb inward toward the center midline of your body. Lateral or external rotation is turning it outward.
Okay.
And then we have a pair of movements that are incredibly important for everyday function, supination and pronation.
Oh, I love these. If you're listening, hold your hands out straight in front of you, palms facing the floor.
Yeah.
Now, roll your hands outward so your palms are facing the ceiling. You just supinated.
Yep.
The easiest way to remember this, which I think is great, is imagining you are holding a bowl of soup. Supination. Rolling your hands back over so the palms face the floor is pronation.
I use that soup analogy all the time. But while we often use those terms for the forearm, specifically the radial ulnar joint just below the elbow, the text applies them to the feet as well.
Wait, my feet can hold soup.
Sort of. If you roll your weight onto the outside edges of your feet, lifting the inner arches, that is supination at the subtalar joint below the ankle. Rolling your ankles inward, flattening your arches toward the floor is pronation.
All right, we've got the joint vocabulary down. We know the phases of the movement. But this next part is where my mind was completely blown. The textbook demands that we analyze the actual types of muscle contractions happening during these movements.
This is a big one.
Because I always thought a muscle just flexed. It squeezed, it worked, end of story. But there were 3 entirely distinct ways a muscle works.
Yeah, this is perhaps the most fundamental concept in exercise science.
Yeah.
And it completely reshapes how you view working out. The first type is the concentric contraction.
The classic.
Right, this is the classic engine. It is what everyone pictures when they hear the word flex. The muscle develops a level of internal tension that is greater than the resistance acting against it.
So it wins.
Exactly. Because the internal force wins the battle, the muscle physically shortens, pulling the insertion point closer to the origin point, creating visible movement.
So the bicep curl is the easiest visual here. In the up phase, I have a 10-pound dumbbell in my hand. Gravity's pulling it down. My bicep generates 11 pounds of pulling force. My muscle wins, it physically bunches up and shortens, and the dumbbell rises. The engine is overcoming the resistance.
Spot on. Then we have eccentric contractions. This occurs when the tension generated by your muscle is deliberately less than the external resistance.
Deliberately less.
Yes. The muscle is still highly active, it is still firing and generating tension, but it is physically lengthening.
Okay, I have to push back on this because it just sounds like a paradox. How can a muscle be contracting and working, but also being stretched out and lengthened at the exact same time? It's like putting your car in drive, but rolling backward down a hill.
That is actually a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Think about lowering that same 10-pound dumbbell back down from the top of the curl. If your biceps simply turned off, the weight would just plummet and snap your elbow straight. To lower it with control, your bicep is still engaged. It is still gripping, metaphorically speaking, but it is allowing the muscle fibers to slowly slide apart, lengthening under tension.
So the engine is shifted from pulling the car up the hill to acting as the brake pads to stop it from crashing down the hill.
Precisely. Eccentric contractions are your biological brake pads. They counter the force of gravity and they counter momentum. When you walk down a steep flight of stairs, every single step requires massive eccentric contractions in your quadriceps to absorb the impact and prevent your knees from buckling.
Wow, so every step down is a brake.
Yeah. When you sit down in a chair, you aren't just collapsing, right? Your leg and glute muscles are eccentrically lengthening to lower you softly.
And returning to our runaway train picture, the muscles on the back of his shoulder, the posterior deltoids, and the rotator cuff, they are lengthening as his arm flies forward, but they are firing with everything they have to apply the brakes.
Which brings up a critical physiological reality. Highlighted in the text, eccentric contractions generate substantially more tension within the muscle tissue than concentric contractions.
Why? Why does braking cause more tension than the actual heavy lifting?
Well, without diving too deeply into the microscopic tearing of sarcomeres, you can think of it as a mechanical disadvantage. When a muscle shortens concentrically, all the microscopic fibers are ratcheting together smoothly in the direction they are designed to go.
Okay, they're cooperating.
Right. But during an eccentric contraction, those fibers are gripping tightly, trying to hold on, while the external load physically rips them apart, elongating them. The mechanical strain on the connective tissue, the tendons, and the muscle fibers themselves is exponentially higher.
That sounds painful.
It is. This rapid, forceful lengthening is where the vast majority of muscle damage, micro-tearing, and eventual soreness originates.
Which totally explains why if I go to the gym and do negatives, where a spotter helps me lift a huge weight, and then I just slowly lower it myself over 5 seconds, I literally cannot lift my arms the next day. The eccentric load destroyed my brake pad.
Exactly.
Okay, to be thorough, there's a third type of contraction, isometric.
Isometric contractions are the unsung, invisible heroes of biomechanics. The muscle develops intense tension, but the internal force exactly matches the external resistance. As a result, there is absolutely no visible movement at the joint. The muscle neither shortens nor lengthens.
Planking is the classic example here, right?
Yeah.
You're holding your body parallel to the floor. Gravity wants to pull your hips down. Your core muscles fire with the exact amount of force needed to counteract gravity. You aren't moving an inch, but you are sweating bullets and your abs are screaming.
That's it, exactly. Isometric stabilization is what allows the rest of your body to move safely. You cannot have a cannon fire effectively from a canoe. Your core must isometrically lock down the canoe so your limbs can concentrically and eccentrically fire the cannon.
Okay, we've dismantled the movement into phases. We've mapped the joint angles. We understand the engines, the brakes, and the stabilizers. We are moving beyond the purely mechanical observation now, shifting into what the text calls analyzing the muscles used, like who is actually doing the work.
Right. And when you look at any joint movement, it is incredibly rare for a single, isolated muscle to be doing all the heavy lifting. The text introduces a hierarchy of muscular roles. At the top, you have the prime mover. This is the main muscular engine fundamentally responsible for producing the specific action.
But the prime mover has backup, the synergists.
Yes. Synergists are fascinating because their roles adapt based on the need. Sometimes they act as true assistants, combining their force with the prime mover to overcome a massive load, but their more nuanced and arguably more important role is acting as neutralizers.
The textbook gives a really specific breakdown of how neutralizers work using the wrist joint, and I literally had to read it 3 times to visualize it. Can you walk us through the tug of war happening in the wrist?
It is a brilliant example of biological engineering. So let's say you want to execute a pure, straight flexion of your wrist, bending your palm toward your inner forearm. You have muscles that perform wrist flexion, but they don't just flex.
They have side hustles.
Exactly. Some of those flexor muscles also inherently pull the wrist to the left, which is abduction. Other flexor muscles inherently pull the wrist to the right, which is adduction.
So if I only fired the left pulling flexor, my wrist would bend forward but tilt wildly to the thumb side.
Exactly. So your brain fires both sets of muscles simultaneously. The left pulling abduction force and the right pulling adduction force perfectly cancel each other out. They neutralize the side-to-side deviation.
Oh, wow.
What remains is only the shared action they both possess, pure, straight-ahead wrist flexion. The synergists fight a lateral tug-of-war so the joint can move straight forward.
The sheer computational power of the nervous system to coordinate that on the fly is staggering. To keep track of this dizzying web of prime movers and neutralizers, the textbook utilizes a specific organizational tool called JAM charts. JAM, joint, action, muscle.
The JAM charts are basically the architectural blueprints of movement. The text uses a standard barbell bench press to demonstrate how comprehensive these charts need to be.
Let's slow down a bench press frame by frame using the JAM chart. You're lying on your back, the heavy bar is on your chest, you're pushing it up. That's the up phase.
So we consult the chart. First, we isolate the shoulder joint. What is the action? The humerus bones are moving from out wide, bringing the arms across the front of the chest. The scientific term for that is horizontal adduction. The chart identifies the prime movers for this action: the pectoralis major, the large chest muscle, and the anterior deltoid, the front of the shoulder.
But the shoulders aren't the only thing moving. Your arms are also straightening out.
Which takes us to the elbow joint on the chart. The action is elbow extension. The prime mover here is the triceps brachii on the back of your arm. And we cannot ignore the shoulder girdle itself, the shoulder blades resting on the bench.
Right, they move too.
As you press up, your shoulder blades slide apart, spreading wide around your rib cage. That action is abduction of the shoulder girdle, driven by the serratus anterior and the pectoralis minor.
So in this one single fluid push, I have multiple joints rotating and extending on different axes, utilizing entirely different muscle groups across my chest, shoulders, arms, and ribs, all firing concentrically in perfect synchronization to move the barbell up.
And then the moment you reach the top and begin to lower the bar back to your chest, that entire symphony reverses. The exact same muscles, the pecs, the anterior delts, the triceps, must instantly transition from concentric engines to eccentric brake pads, lengthening under tension so the bar doesn't free fall and crush your sternum.
Which brings us to a massive turning point in the textbook. We can map all this anatomy in a vacuum. But the whole point of client-centered exercise prescription is applying this to a real human being. We have to evaluate the purpose, the effectiveness, and crucially, the risk. The text introduces a case study here to illustrate this. A woman named Laura.
Right, Laura. Laura is a postal worker. Her daily reality involves standing at a sorting station, constantly reaching out, lifting packages, and moving them into different bins. It is highly repetitive, forward-reaching motion.
Recipe for burnout.
Yeah. She comes to a trainer because her shoulders are chronically fatigued by the end of her shift, and she wants to build endurance to avoid the injuries she sees plaguing her older coworkers.
The goal isn't just getting jacked. It's highly specific occupational durability. The trainer in the textbook designs a core exercise specifically for her needs, the lateral arm raise. She stands holding a dumbbell in each hand, arms straight down at her sides, and lifts them straight out laterally to form a T-shape.
Let's apply our analysis. The primary purpose is to strengthen the middle deltoid, the outer cap of the shoulder, and the upper back muscles to give her better structural support for her reaching tasks. But the textbook highlights a very specific, seemingly minor instruction the trainer gives Laura. She must perform these raises with her thumbs pointing up toward the ceiling, particularly when lifting the weight above the horizontal line of her shoulders.
Thumbs up. If I try that right now, palms facing forward, thumbs up. Why does that minor rotation of the wrist and shoulder matter at all?
It matters because of the unforgiving architecture of the human shoulder. To understand this, we have to look at the bones. Your shoulder blade, the scapula, has a bony projection at the very top called the acromion process. It effectively forms a rigid, bony roof directly over the shoulder joint.
Like an awning over a window.
Exactly. And the space between that bony awning and the head of your arm bone is incredibly narrow. Running through that tiny gap are extremely sensitive soft tissues, the rotator cuff tendons, and a fluid-filled sac called a bursa, which prevents friction.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When you lift your arm out to the side, the arm bone hinges upward, closing that gap.
So you're pinching the tissues against the bony roof.
If you lift your arms laterally with your palms facing down, the bony knob on your arm bone rotates directly upward, physically slamming into the acromine roof and violently jamming the tendons and bursa. Over time, this repetitive pinching causes a debilitating condition known as impingement syndrome. The tissues inflame, swell, and eventually tear.
So by simply turning her thumbs up, what changes?
Turning the thumbs up externally rotates the humerus bone. It rotates that large bony knob out of the way, creating just enough clearance, literally a few millimeters of space for the arm to raise fully without crushing the soft tissues beneath the acromine roof.
This absolutely fascinates me because it completely destroys the toxic no pain, no gain mentality you see plastered all over gym culture. You see these viral videos of a drill sergeant trainer screaming at a client, forcing them to push through shoulder pain, hyping them up to get one more rep on a shoulder press. But if the client's anatomy is literally grinding bone on tendon, pushing through the pain isn't tough, it's catastrophic. Does this mean evaluating the mechanical risk is just as important as the muscular effectiveness?
It is the foundation of professional liability. The text divides risks into two distinct categories that every trainer must evaluate. First are intrinsic risks. These are the anatomical realities or structural limitations the client inherently brings with them. Some people are born with an acromion process that hooks sharply downward, making their clearance space even tighter. You cannot train away a bone shape.
It's the hand they were dealt.
Then you have extrinsic risks. These are the variables introduced by the trainer or the environment. Poorly designed exercise execution, like demanding heavy lateral raises with palms down. Pushing a client to fatigue where their form collapses. If a trainer ignores an intrinsic anatomical risk and applies an extrinsic pressure to achieve a burn, they are no longer prescribing exercise, they are actively engineering an injury.
You wouldn't force a gear to turn in an engine if you can see a wrench jammed in the teeth. You stop and remove the wrench.
Yeah.
Okay, we have thoroughly analyzed the components. We have the phases, the vocabulary, the jam charts, the risk assessment. Now we have to actually build something. We transition from microscopic analysis to the musculoskeletal exercise design model.
And the very first thing the text addresses in this design section is a severe warning against a widespread industry failure, design template syndrome.
Which sounds incredibly dry, but the implications for someone paying for personal training are massive.
Design template syndrome is the practice of treating human beings like identical assembly line products. A client walks in the door wanting to lose weight, and the trainer pulls template A out of a filing cabinet. Another client wants to relieve lower back pain, they get template B.
Cookie cutter programs.
Exactly. It completely ignores everything we just discussed. It ignores their specific limb length, their intrinsic joint risks, their occupational history.
It's fast food fitness. It's lazy.
Right.
To avoid this, the textbook outlines a stringent 5-step exercise design model. The first step is identifying the primary component. To me, this reads like the art of translation, because a client rarely walks into a gym and says, I need to increase the tensile strength of my posterior kinetic chain. They say something vague like, my lower back kills me after sitting at my desk all day.
The client provides a lifestyle goal. The professional must translate that into a physiological component. No back pain is a desire. It is not a trainable variable.
Right.
The trainer evaluates the client and determines that the physiological causes of the pain are chronic tightness in the hip flexors, severe muscular weakness in the abdominal wall, and dormant gluteal muscles.
You're identifying the broken parts of the machine. Once you have those physiological components, you move to step 2, target the muscles. And the dominant theme of this section is achieving muscular balance. The textbook provides a highly specific, very relatable scenario here. Imagine a client who spends 8 to 10 hours a day slumped over a computer keyboard, but he joins a weekend baseball league, and he comes to the trainer because he wants to increase the power of his throwing arm.
If we cross-reference his occupational posture with his athletic goal, we immediately spot a disastrous mechanical conflict. Because he sits hunched over a laptop all day, his anterior muscles, his chest, the pectoralis major, and the front of his shoulders, the anterior deltoids are constantly in a shortened, contracted state. Over time, they literally adapt to this shortened length and become chronically tight.
It's the classic C-spine posture. The shoulders roll forward, the chest caves in.
Now consider the mechanics of throwing a baseball. It requires immense explosive concentric power from those exact same anterior muscles to whip the arm forward. If the trainer just says, okay, let's build your throwing power, and puts him on a bench press to strengthen his chest, they are pouring gasoline on a fire.
Because you are taking a muscle that is already abnormally tight and shortened, and you are overloading it to make it tighter and stronger. It's like winding up a rubber band that is already at its snapping point.
Exactly. The risk of a severe anterior muscle tear or shoulder dislocation skyrockets. Achieving muscular balance requires targeting the antagonists, the opposing muscles on the other side of the joint. The proper design for this client is aggressively stretching the tight chest and front shoulders, while simultaneously overloading and strengthening the posterior muscles, the rhomboids, the posterior deltoids, the middle trapezius in the upper back.
You literally have to rebuild his skeletal posture, pulling his shoulders back into neutral alignment before you can safely allow him to throw a ball at maximum velocity. You are reverse engineering his desk job.
Which perfectly segues into step 3 of the design model, determining the appropriate joint movements. We know we need to stretch his tight anterior muscles and strengthen his weak posterior muscles. How do we know which specific physical movements will achieve that?
We pull out the jam charts again, but we use them backward.
Precisely. Let's say we identify that the client has massive chronic tension in his upper trapezius, the muscles running from the neck to the top of the shoulders. We need to design a stretch for it. The jam chart tells us that the upper trapezius is responsible for elevating the shoulder blades, shrugging your shoulders up toward your ears, and it assists in extending the neck, tilting your head backward.
So if I know the muscle's job is to shrug up and tilt back to stretch it, I just force the joints to do the exact opposite.
Pure applied logic. To stretch the upper trapezius, you instruct the client to actively depress their shoulder blades, pushing them down toward the floor, and then flex the neck forward, pulling the chin to the chest, or laterally flexing it by tilting the ear away from the shoulder. You are mathematically reversing the muscle's natural action to pull the fibers apart.
It makes exercise selection feel less like picking random torture devices in the gym and more like solving a biological equation. Okay, so we have the blueprint mapped out. But a blueprint is theoretical. When you put a living, breathing human being on the gym floor, things get complicated. This takes us to the art of modification, steps 4 and 5 of the design model. Step 4 is design and modify. You take a baseline exercise and tweak the biomechanics to fit a hyper-specific scenario.
The textbook offers a fantastic sports application here. A recreational tennis player comes in and their specific weakness is generating power on their backhand top spin stroke. You cannot fix that with a generic chest press or bicep curl. The trainer must modify an existing exercise to perfectly mimic the required kinetic chain.
And the expert modifies the same lateral arm raise we talked about with Laura, the male sorter, but it looks completely different.
To simulate the exact mechanics of a backhand topspin, the trainer has the client start the movement with a bent elbow, holding the dumbbell across their torso. As they raise the arm out to the side, the client is instructed to actively rotate their arm, lifting the weight straight up toward the ceiling.
So they're combining shoulder abduction with lateral, external rotation of the shoulder joint simultaneously.
They are precisely loading the exact muscular pathway utilized on the tennis court. It is hyper-specific neurological and muscular training, but modifying exercises requires a deep understanding of physics because tweaking angles can accidentally introduce massive risk. Which brings us to step 5, the safety check. You must scrutinize the modified design for potential catastrophe.
And the textbook introduces a psychological profile here that I think resonates with almost everyone, the weekend warrior.
The weekend warrior is the classic demographic of injury. This is the client who lives a highly sedentary, desk-bound life Monday through Friday. Their tissues adapt to sitting. Then, Saturday morning arrives and they charge onto the soccer pitch or the basketball court, engaging in highly competitive, unpredictable, high-impact movements.
They go from sitting in a Herman Miller chair for 40 hours directly to sprinting, cutting, and diving for a ball.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this client is a walking time bomb for connective tissue rupture. Why? Because of rapid, forceful, eccentric contractions.
Under brake pads again?
Yes. When you sprint and suddenly plant your foot to change direction, your knee and ankle must absorb massive momentum. The muscles must eccentrically brake with immense force. The sedentary wet day tissues simply do not possess the tensile strength to withstand that sudden shearing force. Tendons snap, ligaments tear.
So what is the safety check here? If I'm the trainer, do I just sit this guy down and say, look, man, you're an accountant now. Your body is built for spreadsheets, not slide tackles. Quit the league.
Telling a client to abandon what brings them joy is terrible client-centered care. The safety check is entirely proactive. The trainer must design a weekday preventative program that specifically hardens the body against eccentric trauma. You integrate progressive, heavily loaded eccentric actions into their Tuesday and Thursday gym sessions.
You intentionally inflict controlled micro-trauma during the week.
Exactly. You load the muscles eccentrically to force the connective tissues to remodel and build up their tensile strength.
Yeah.
You are deliberately hardening the biological brake pads in a controlled environment so they don't disintegrate under the chaotic stress of the weekend game.
I want to talk about a specific anecdote in the text regarding safety checks, because it addresses what happens when the client decides to play scientist and modify an exercise themselves. Is it always a bad thing? The story involves a client doing wall squats.
It's a highly instructive case study. The trainer prescribes a wall squat using a large inflatable stability ball placed between the client's lower back and the wall. The trainer carefully demonstrates proper form, feet shoulder width apart, toes pointing straight ahead, knees tracking perfectly over the toes as they squat down. The client demonstrates competence, and the trainer leaves them to execute the program independently for a few weeks.
But when the trainer comes back to check on the progress, the client has gone rogue.
The trainer observes the client performing the wall squat with an entirely contraindicated foot placement. Contraindicated meaning it actively invites injury. The client had moved their feet exceptionally wide apart and severely rotated their toes to point outward, almost in completely opposite directions.
Like a classical ballet plie, but leaning heavily against a rubber ball on a wall. It looks absurd. Why on earth would the client intentionally adopt such a bizarre posture?
The trainer stops them and asks exactly that. And the client's reasoning is totally logical from a perspective of immediate pain avoidance. The client explains that they had recently developed severe shin splints from a running program.
Ouch.
Right. When they tried to do the normal wall squat with their toes pointing forward, the anterior tibialis muscle in the shin screamed in pain. But by turning their feet wildly outward, they somehow bypassed the painful shin muscle and could complete the squat without feeling the shin splints.
So the client's intention was actually self-preservation. They found a workaround. But what did the trainer, looking through the lens of biomechanical physics, actually see happening?
The trainer saw an impending orthopedic disaster. By forcing the feet into that extreme outward rotation while the hips were locked against the wall via the stability ball, the client was creating a devastating shear torque directly across the knee joint.
Okay, let's visualize this torque. Think of your knee joint like a heavy metal door hinge. A hinge is designed to swing freely back and forth on one specific axis, opening and closing. That's flexion and extension. If you swing the door, it works perfectly forever. But what this client was doing with the wide outward toe stance was the equivalent of wedging a crowbar between the door and the frame and trying to violently bend the hinge sideways. The knee is not designed to absorb rotational shearing forces under heavy loads. The ligaments, the ACL, the MCL, were being stretched to their absolute breaking point.
The shin pain was temporarily relieved, yes, but the client was literally trading a minor temporary muscular inflammation in the shin for a catastrophic permanent ligament rupture in the knee.
So how does the trainer fix it? Do they just aggressively force the client's feet back to pointing straight ahead and tell them to tough out the shin pain?
This is the ultimate test of the safety check. If the trainer corrects the feet to save the knee, the client is in agonizing shin pain and cannot perform the movement. If they leave the feet wide, the knee is destroyed. The textbook solution is the only correct professional response. The trainer completely eliminated the exercise from the program.
They just scrapped it.
They stopped the wall squats immediately. They replaced it with a non-weight-bearing alternative until the shin splints were fully healed. Only when the client could perform the original straight-foot biomechanics entirely pain-free was the wall squat reintroduced. Recognizing when an exercise simply cannot be salvaged is the mark of a true professional.
We have covered an absolute mountain of physiological data. We've designed a biomechanically perfect, muscularly balanced, meticulously risk-evaluated custom routine. It is a masterpiece on paper. But as the textbook aggressively points out, all of this brilliant scientific design is utterly worthless if you cannot successfully upload it into the brain of the living, breathing human being standing in front of you on the gym floor.
You are not programming a machine via Bluetooth. You're teaching a person with anxieties, preconceptions, and varying levels of body awareness.
Which brings us to the human element. The textbook treats the concept of exercise demonstration not as a casual, hey, watch me do this interaction, but as a formal, highly structured pedagogical process. It outlines a strict four-step demonstration model.
Let's unpack the model. Step 1 is the pre-demonstration. This happens before anyone even touches a piece of equipment. The trainer must set the climate and explicitly sell the benefits of the movement, tethering it directly to the client's stated goals.
So if I'm showing an elderly client how to do a box squat, I don't bore them with jam charts. I don't say, we are going to concentrically load the gluteus maximus to overcome gravitational resistance. I anchor it to their reality. I say, this exact movement is going to strengthen the muscles you use to stand up from your low armchair, so you won't need to rock back and forth to get up anymore.
You establish the why before the how. Step 2 is the actual demonstration. The trainer acts as the absolute standard of perfect form. The text advises the trainer to silently perform 4 to 6 flawless repetitions before the client attempts it.
Silently.
Yes. The client needs to observe perfect core stabilization, a controlled tempo, and proper breathing patterns without the distraction of trying to do it themselves yet or listening to instructions.
Step 3 is client trials. The client finally gets under the bar or on the machine, and the trainer spots them, correcting their physical positioning. And finally, step 4 is the follow-up, where the trainer gathers subjective feedback. Did it hurt? Did you feel it in the target muscle or somewhere else?
But the true crucible of a trainer's skill occurs during step 3, the client trials. Because the moment a novice client attempts a new mechanical movement, things will inevitably break down. The trainer must instantly analyze the visual data and categorize the error. The textbook poses a profound diagnostic question that must be answered in seconds. Is the breakdown an execution fault, or is it a design fault?
This diagnostic process is fascinating. The text provides a specific scenario to highlight the difference. A client is performing a lying hamstring curl. They're lying flat on their stomach on a padded bench, their ankles are hooked under a weighted roller, and they're trying to pull their heels up toward their glutes by flexing their hamstrings. But every time they pull the weight, their buttocks aggressively rise up into the air off the bench. Their hips are visibly bending.
This is an incredibly common mechanical breakdown. The hamstrings are supposed to isolate the knee joint, but the client is recruiting the hip joint to cheat the movement. The question is why? If the weight stack is set to 100 pounds and the client's hamstrings can only generate 60 pounds of force, the client's central nervous system panics and starts throwing their body weight and momentum into the pool to move the load. That is an execution fault.
The machine design is fine. The weight is just too heavy. The fix is simple. Drop the pin down to 50 pounds and their hips will stay flat.
But what if you drop the weight to 10 pounds, virtually no resistance, and their buttocks still rise into the air the moment they try to curl their legs?
Then you're dealing with a design fault. The body physically cannot perform the mechanics as requested.
The text offers 2 compelling anatomical explanations for this specific design fault. First, the client might have chronically tight rectus femoris muscles. The rectus femoris is a massive quadricep muscle on the front of the thigh, but crucially, it crosses over the hip joint and attaches to the pelvis.
So if that front thigh muscle is tight, like a shortened bungee cord, the moment they try to curl their leg backward, the bungee cord pulls taut and physically yanks the pelvis up off the bench.
Exactly. The second possibility is profound core weakness. The abdominal muscles are responsible for isometrically stabilizing the pelvis against the bench. If the abdominals are too weak to hold the pelvis down against the pulling force of the hamstrings, the hips pop up.
So the failure looks like a leg problem, but it's actually a hip flexor tightness problem or a core weakness problem. If it's a design fault, you can't just yell at the client to keep their hips down. Their anatomy literally won't allow it. You'll just make them feel incompetent.
Yeah.
But how do you fix it?
You modify the environmental design to accommodate the anatomy. The textbook offers a brilliantly simple, biomechanically sound solution. The trainer rolls up a thick towel and places it underneath the client's pelvis while they lie on the bench.
A rolled up towel. How does elevating their hips solve the problem?
By placing the towel under the pelvis, you slightly elevate the hips, introducing a mild degree of hip flexion before the movement even starts. This subtle change in joint angle provides slack to the tight rectus femoris. You've essentially unhooked the tight bungee cord. With the tension released from the pelvis, the hamstrings can now concentrically fire and curl the leg without the pelvis being yanked into the air.
That is mind-blowing. It's like a master mechanic diagnosing an engine knock and fixing it by adjusting a tiny valve clearance by 2 millimeters. It instantly corrects the biomechanics without requiring the client to forcefully fight their own tight tissues. And here is the major pivot of the entire chapter. To execute these fixes, to gather this feedback without destroying a client's ego and confidence, you have to profile the psychology of the human being you are talking to.
This is the true meaning of client-centered prescription. The biomechanics are universally applicable, but the communication of those biomechanics must be highly individualized. The trainer must tailor their entire teaching persona to match the client's learning style and personality style.
The textbook outlines 4 distinct learning styles, which dictates how the client processes physical information. First is learning by doing. If you have a doer, talking at them is useless. You must have them physically perform the exercise, often at an excruciatingly slow tempo, so their brain can internally map the proprioceptive feeling of the muscle tension. They need to feel the brake pads engaging.
Second is learning by observation. These clients process visually. They need to see stark contrasts. For this client, the trainer might perform a squat very quickly, utilizing terrible, bouncy momentum. Then the trainer performs it at a slow, controlled, perfect cadence. The trainer then literally asks the client to verbally critique the 2 demonstrations. This engages their visual processing center and solidifies the concept before they ever attempt it.
Third is learning by knowing the theory. These are the analytical clients. They need the why. If you just say, do this, they will resist. You have to pull out the metaphorical jam charts. You explain the concentric engines, the eccentric brake loads, the neutralizing synergists. Once they understand the physics, they will execute perfectly.
And fourth is learning by application. These clients need the gym to translate directly to their real life. You don't talk about muscle fibers, you ask them to imagine where else in their daily routine they will utilize this specific rotational core strength. You connect the medicine ball twist to their ability to swing a golf club or safely wrestle with their kids.
But adapting to how they learn is only half the psychological battle. You also have to adapt to who they are. The text explains that a professional trainer must act like a social chameleon, completely shifting their tone, pacing, and vocabulary based on 3 broad personality styles.
The first profile is the technical personality. When instructing a technical client, your demeanor must be calm and methodical. You explain the physiological pros and cons of every movement. You use a moderate, steady speaking pace, and your feedback must be incredibly specific. You don't say, good job. You say, your elbow extension was exactly 10 degrees smoother on that repetition.
Then you have the sociable personality. For these clients, the gym is an inherently intimidating, sterile place, and they crave connection. Your pace must be relaxed. You constantly invite their feedback. You prioritize checking on their comfort levels. And above all, you have to be a genuinely empathetic listener. If they want to talk about their stressful workday between sets, you listen. The interpersonal relationship is the anchor that keeps them adhering to the mechanical program.
And finally, the assertive personality. This requires a complete tonal shift. You must be businesslike, stimulating, and fast-paced. Assertive clients want efficiency. You do not overwhelm them with endless biomechanical options. You limit their choices to keep the momentum high. However, you absolutely must solicit and incorporate their input on those limited choices so they maintain a sense of control and ownership over the session. If they feel dictated to, they will rebel.
It requires immense emotional intelligence to juggle all of this while simultaneously counting reps and monitoring joint torque. And part of that emotional intelligence extends to the physical space itself. The textbook devotes a very serious section to cueing and touching boundaries.
Historically, the fitness industry was incredibly hands-on. Trainers would routinely grab a client's hips to align them or physically pulling their shoulders back. The modern client-centered approach strictly forbids this without explicit prior consent. Respecting a client's bodily autonomy and personal boundaries is paramount. If you do not have permission to touch a client to correct an execution fault, you must rely on a deeper toolbox of cues.
The alternatives the text provides are fantastic. You can rely on visual cues demonstrating the precise correction on your own body while they observe. But my favorite are the tactile cues that do not involve the trainer's hands at all. If a client is swaying their torso too much during a bicep curl, you don't push them. You have them stand with their back flat against a wall. The wall provides instant, objective, physical feedback the moment they break form.
Or you utilize mental imagery, which can bypass conscious overthinking and trigger immediate neuromuscular activation. If a client is failing to isometrically brace their core during a lift, poking their stomach is invasive and often ineffective. Instead, you offer the imagery cue. Imagine your torso is an accordion, and I need you to squeeze all the air out of it. That vivid mental picture instantly translates to a massive contraction of the abdominal wall.
Squeeze the accordion. It's visceral. The brain knows exactly how to command the muscles to execute that image. And finally, wrapping up the psychological domain, the text lays down an absolute golden rule for verbal reinforcement. It states unequivocally, correct the behavior, not the person.
It is the difference between coaching and shaming.
Exactly. You eliminate negative personal phrases from your vocabulary. You never look at a struggling client and say, that's wrong, or you're doing it badly, or even don't lock your elbows. Those phrases immediately put the client on the defensive. They feel judged. Instead, you use positive correctives that focus purely on the mechanics. You say, let's keep that cadence to 1 second up and 3 seconds down, or keep those elbows soft at the top. Excellent.
You are affirming their effort while precisely tuning their mechanics. What's fascinating here is, if we step back and look at the totality of this textbook chapter, it presents a fascinating dichotomy. We spent the vast majority of our time dissecting the origins and insertions of muscles, the torque applied to synovial joints, the microscopic tearing of eccentric braking. It is hardcore physics and biology. Yet the text concludes that this psychosocial domain, the empathy, the cues, the tonal shifts, is arguably more critical to long-term success than the biomechanics.
Because the perfect physical blueprint doesn't matter if the client feels alienated, confused, or judged. If they don't feel successful and safe, they simply will not return to the gym. The mechanical symphony never gets played.
Exactly. The science of movement must be delivered through the art of human connection.
Wow. We have traversed an absolute mountain of information today. Let's try to synthesize this massive journey we've been on. We started at the literal microscopic level, analyzing the sheer violent tension generated when muscle fibers shorten concentrically to act as engines, and when they lengthen eccentrically, gripping desperately to act as the brake pads.
We took those isolated contractions and mapped them onto the skeleton using the jam charts, watching how synergist muscles fight invisible tug-of-wars just to allow our joints to move in a straight line.
From there, we elevated our view to the clinical design level. We learned how to translate vague desires into structural needs. We saw how sitting at a desk shortens the chest and weakens the back, requiring a masterfully balanced routine to reverse engineer our modern posture. We analyzed the catastrophic shear torque of a poorly modified wall squat and the simple brilliance of putting a towel under a tight hip flexor to restore hamstring isolation.
And we wrapped it all in the necessary psychological armor, understanding that every human brain processes physical instruction differently, and that protecting a client's dignity through positive cueing is the ultimate safety check.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive right now? It means that the next time you step into a gym, or even just watch someone out for a jog, I challenge you to stop seeing exercise as a primitive binary of sweating or not sweating. Look deeper. Visualize the primary movers firing. Imagine the eccentric brake pads screaming to decelerate the limbs. Appreciate the incredibly delicate clearance space beneath the shoulder roof that keeps a joint from tearing itself apart. You are witnessing a masterclass in biomechanical engineering happening in real time.
It fundamentally transforms how you view human capability.
It really does. Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We have spent an hour applying this intense microscopic level of biomechanical and psychological analysis to something as artificial as a 45-minute gym routine. But what if you carried this hyper-awareness of your mechanics into your actual life? If you truly understand the sheer mind-boggling complexity, the delicate muscular tug-of-war required to execute a movement as simple as a squat, does it make you treat your physical body with a little more grace, a little more awe, and a little more patience? When you're carrying awkwardly heavy groceries up a steep flight of stairs, or when you finally stand up after hunching over a laptop for 9 hours, remember what your joints and fibers are silently orchestrating just to keep you upright. You're walking around inside a priceless masterpiece of biological engineering. Treat it accordingly. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. We will catch you next time.